everyone, my name is Graves, as you may or may not know due to my infrequent posting on this channel, because if there's anything that you know about me, it's inconsistency. And I want to do a bit of a sort of reaction to the Worlds preview video I put out a couple weeks ago. Because at this point, Season 7 Worlds is over, we're well on the way to Season 8, and I thought there's nothing better than for me to do than to look back at where I completely screwed up in these previews. And I also want to give a bit of background and a bit of sort of some descriptions and sort of behind the scenes stuff about some of my editing decisions in this video, maybe like specific transitions, and just want to touch more on some extra points and stuff like that, because I genuinely just want to talk about it, and there's nothing better for me to do. So let's immediately start with what you see right here on the screen, and that is the thumbnail that I originally used for this video. I did actually change the thumbnail a day after it was uploaded, and it's because if you look on the top left and top right, you see the logos for Belt Slap on the left and Mind the Gap on the right. Yeah, those circles were basically made by me, and they are uneven. I know. I didn't realize at the time, but on the Smite Esports website, there were actual logos that did not have any backgrounds for Belt Slap and Mind the Gap, which should have realized that sooner. But I did correct the actual thumbnail for the video to reflect that. Also, I apologize for the ugly-looking rectangle. And but I want to get started and just look at specific lines, maybe in this little intro thing, just to give some little fun insights.
The tradition continues.
We'll say though, I have recorded this video before. I did originally do this. It was a 40-minute long video, and the audio for the video sounded like crap, and my mic volume was too low because Dolby surround sound sucks.
Hello everyone, my name is Graves, and welcome back to my YouTube channel for my annual upload. And
So,
once
yada,
again,
yada,
it's going to
yada.
be a Worlds preview video
World's
because
preview stuff.
I'm very unoriginal. Fight me. Because
Don't
the year
fight me,
2020 can suck, but hey, it all leads up to an actual good thing happening at the start of 2021, so we take those?
One, we do take those, and two, the reason I included that line is because I actually finished writing the script for this video on New Year's Eve, 2020. So that was my sort of final send-off and final screw you to the year of 2020. And from here, the spiel is pretty standard. I did actually make this all one video. I wanted to make a separate video for Wildcard, but I eventually decided I hadn't watched enough Challenger Circuit and Open Circuit to really give true analysis, or analysis that I thought was even decent enough to be called basement tier, as I'd call even this analysis later in the video. I just didn't feel qualified enough to do that, and I felt, at least from watching the teams at Wildcards, we can sort of see, like, okay, this team was good. The two teams that won, we can sort of see how they did, and look at that from there. Really. And I'll also skip the initial format explaining part because, let's be real, no one needs to hear me describe the Worlds format because we know the Worlds format at this point in time.
Okay, to crown a new Smite World Champion.
Yada yada yada. So I want to take this time to explain the transitions I used. So for the video in the background, like the text, it was like an animated text thing in DaVinci Resolve that I used for all the different stuff, except I changed out, like, for example, it says EU wildcard, I changed it to, like, what SPL seed were they, or the NA wildcard, or whatever, and the bottom one was the team name, which was bolded. As for the video in the background, it changed from team to team, and I sort of did it to reflect specific players that were on specific teams. Mostly players with, like, some sort of Worlds experience in the past, and just, like, reflecting, like, hey, this is a sort of, like, previous team that relates to the team in question. And it was, like, a fun little thing. I immediately screwed up with Belt Slap, though, because part I was highlighting this was Trixtank, who didn't actually end up playing in this tournament. One of the couple things that I got really wrong in this video was saying Trixtank would play when he wasn't playing. He was replaced by Genetics, which also good player. But I'll talk more about that when I get into actual Belt Slap itself. The actual thing in the background in question here is TSM winning the launch tournament back in 2014. Oh, as for the audio clip, it is literally an audio clip of Thor alt landing on the ground. I sort of got the inspiration from Urinating Tree and his Haters Guide series. So that's where I got the idea. Like, okay, I can do like a transition and like have like some sort of like marking noise, be like, hey, we're going to a new segment or something. And I literally got the audio clip from like on the Smite game website and in the live client. There are videos for each god using each ability in the game. And all the sound is isolated to just like have those effects, nothing else, because it's just showing off the ability. And I isolated the audio from that video, a video of Thor using his ult from there, and took the bottom half of like when he's landing on the ground, and that's where we went with it. So hey, overall it led to this sort of transition, and I do like the transitions I made.
First up, we have the
It
winners.
makes it less of a PowerPoint presentation in a way, which is mostly what these segments are. Because I'm not really doing anything crazy with like graphics here, except for like some minor exceptions to the rule. I mentioned earlier, Trickstank wasn't playing, Genetics was instead. And I'll also like touch on all these teams and how they actually performed at the end of these segments. So I will pause intermittently and give my sort of opinion on like certain things that happened.
Winners of the EU wildcard tournament back in December. Belt Slap. Now, it's not necessarily surprising to see this team here, as all 5 players have a plethora of experience, both the SPL level and the SCC level. However, what was surprising was that they were made to bleed during the wildcard tournament. Belt Slap for most of the year were seen as the gold standard in the EU SCC. However, in their finals against Snake Pit, they were pushed to their limits.
Snake Pit did make them bleed. So, in a way, maybe getting Genetics wasn't such a bad thing after all. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. In all seriousness, it was Trickstank. I think he had exams or something. So really, it's just an unfortunate situation.
So the question for Belt Slap now is this. They've done good against their European competition, but how can they do against an SPL caliber team in Renegades?
And here's where I want to talk about Belt Slap's performance. And quite simply, the answer to that question of can they perform up to the level of the Renegades was no. And that's really disappointing. Not that I'd say like, oh, they were expected to beat Renegades. No, I don't think they were. They also were a team that really got screwed over by the format of Worlds being online only. As a European team, you have to deal with ping, and sure, you have to deal with it both ways. Renegades players had to deal with like people on EU ping, like people in EU playing on NA servers, but I think the EU players had it worse playing on NA servers from Europe. It's a really hard thing to do, but I also will say they didn't really do themselves any favors, especially in Game 1, by picking the least pressure duo lane of all time with Rom and Aphrodite into a duo lane who loves to pick pressure in Barracuda and Jake. They're literally asking for an L, and that's exactly what they got. A massive L. They end up losing 3-0. They do make it closer, especially in some of the later games in the series, Game 2 and Game 3, but that might also have just been from like variety kind of feeding a bit. But overall, it's a shame they had to go through the situation they had to go to with the whole format and with having to play from online. But at the end of the day, they performed, I think, about as well as I think we would have expected them to. That's my ultimate takeaway from Belt Slap at this tournament. Mind the gap, I used Hype Unit Xbox from last year. Actually, when they eliminated Obey, because haha, funny dig at Obey.
Whereas Belt Slap were the expected team to make this stage of the dance, Mind the Gap were anything but. Not to discredit this group of 5 players, but most people looking at the NA wildcard tournament would have either favored the number 1 team from the SEC, Get a Grip, or the number 1 open circuit team in Spreed, which contained 2 players who had played in the SPL this season.
I want to touch on both those points as well. I do still agree that Mind the Gap making it out of here was a bit unexpected. because Get a Grip basically was like the sort of old core, in a way, of Armada in a bit. Because like you've got Meerkat, you've got Masked, you've got players who've been at this level and played at this level, even Haddix in a way. Though he did it as a sub last year of Sanguine. And then with Spreed, Solar Troll and Gaijay alone played in the Pro League this season and performed pretty well in doing so. So seeing both those teams sort of miss out for Mind the Gap is interesting, but I'm proud. I'm happy for Mind the Gap that they made it this far, and I'm gonna just cut to the chase now. Despite the fact that they lost 3-0 to SSG, and despite the fact that I expected them to do a bit better, they still did all right. Crimson in particular looked great, and one thing I will say is it's a massive shame that he won't be playing in the Pro League next season because while he hasn't gotten that opportunity in his career, he did say himself on Twitter a couple days ago that he got the opportunity to play in the SPL, but had to reject it due to scholarship stuff. So, massive shame for him, and I hope eventually he's able to sort of get a spot on a Pro League team and really show the world what he's capable of, because he showed it at this tournament, and I think he's a good mid laner. So, I just want to touch on that. And I'll touch on one other thing at the end when we get there.
Instead, the team that is basically the spiritual successor to last year's Hype Unit Xbox roster comes to the World Championships once again.
Hence why I
And if
picked the
this team
transition.
can perform anything like that team did last year, anyone who they face will have to be on their toes and not underestimate the boys from console. However, SSG is going to be a tough task regardless,
And they
as
were a
they've
tough
looked
task.
strong all year in the regular season. The good news for Mind the Gap, this is more like a playoff scenario where SSG has looked downright abysmal. Can the NA wildcard do the impossible and pull off the upset?
Simple answer was no. And they got swept. And ultimately, I think that's how a lot of people expect it to go. The other thing I wanted to mention, they actually did have a coach. This team did have a coach. Hyra themselves actually never said the team had a coach, but the team had a coach. It's Baronic, who was a longtime console player himself, a longtime mid laner actually. And I believe the only person outside of Vaporish Coast to get a penta in the competitive console scene. So that's a nice little accolade. And that's overall the players in this team performed pretty well for who they're up against. And yeah, I'd love to see some of these players get an opportunity at some point down the line. For Obey Alliance's transition, I could have picked Obey making Season 3 finals. Instead, I went for Wolfie, and I went with the rival upset, the reactions for the rival upset over Energy. Well, the win over Energy at Season 4 World Semis. That's what this is.
To say that this year has been tough for Obey Alliance would be a bit of an understatement. Not even including everything that's happened outside of the SPL, including a change in ownership.
I just want to say this is a cheap shot. I probably shouldn't have included this in the video. It doesn't really make much sense in terms of how the team performed on in-game, because it really didn't affect anything at all. In all seriousness, it's just a dumb controversy about a person being a complete asshole, a manipulator, and just generally a bad person. And I'm happy that Obey's moved on, and I'm happy that they've had a change in ownership, and the people who are running this org now seem to be really dedicated to what they want to do, and I have massive respect for that. So this was a massive cheap shot in my opinion, and I probably should not have included it in the video. But back to Obey in what they actually did during the season.
The team has quite simply struggled for most of the year. The less to be said about the start of the season, the better.
The first half of Phase 1 was downright abysmal. We can... What do I even start with Weekend? I'll partially say the team just didn't really click together. There was some stuff that Weekend did really, okay, that was actually a decent play from Weekend, but like no one was there to help them. And Inbound did not have the best start to the year. I will give props to Inbound, though. He has consistently improved throughout this season, and before I would have said, like, okay, get him out of the Pro League, but now I'm like, you've kind of got something there. Keep pushing. Plus, he's a content creator, and, I mean, if the whole annual Matty Pocket and Taco debating about content creators debate happens again, as it does like once every year, once every 6 months, we've got a support to look to now. Yeah!
To put it bluntly, Obey Alliance this year has taken up the mantle held by Spacestation Gaming last year. A team
I agree with this point 100%. A team that's just generally inconsistent throughout the year, has strong leads, strong starts, and just ends up losing at the end. Is it a bit of a coincidence that Sino played for both teams? Yeah, probably.
team who always starts strong and looks competitive to win games or sets, only to drop them as the games go later. And that's not to say there's no hope for Obey. The pieces of this team have talent and experience in high-pressure situations. The good news is, since they haven't played in 2 months, there's been plenty of time for the team to think of new strategies and possibly get out of the funk they've been in all year. The question is, can they do it in time against a Sanguine team who's likely out for blood?
One clever kind of thing that I didn't really realize about this whole thing of like Sanguine being like a whole thing of like vampires and blood. That's a fun little reference thing. But the answer simply to this question was no. Obey Alliance did not really improve. At all. They didn't look that good against Sanguine at all. There was the whole debate of Shinto in the like promo material leading up to Worlds saying that he didn't even feel Obey Alliance was a Pro League caliber team. And the way that Sanguine beat Obey kinda made him look right. Not gonna lie. I have a gripe with the shot I picked here. Yes, it's eUnited lifting the World Hammer in Season 4. The problem is, I should have picked it, like, I should have started it, like, slightly earlier. So it doesn't have this random backring shot, this random panning shot of the arena, which doesn't mean crap. I really picked it because, like, oh, it's Scream lifting the hammer, and it's Scream being the one person on this roster who was on that team, like, 3 years ago. And all that. But really, I should have, like, started the video earlier and ended with just Scream holding the hammer. That's what I should have done. But in all seriousness, could have also picked the World Celebration itself, but that was more centered around, like, Venenu and Mike, and I didn't actually use the Venenu Celebration for Renegades, because then I'd be including eUnited 3 times as a transition, because, I mean, when you've got Mike, and you think of Season 4 Worlds, what moment do you think of? I had to include it as a transition for one team.
I think it's safe to say that this has been the worst year for eUnited's fans during their 4 seasons in the SPL. After Season 5, this was a team that wasn't used to losing.
They had finished literally top 3 in almost every single split in their history in the Pro League at that point in time. The lone exceptions were their very first split in Season 4 Spring and Season 4 Summer. And I believe they finished 4th in both those splits. Was it? No. Did they finish 3rd one split? They finished 3rd in the spring, yeah. Yeah, so they only finished outside the top 3 once. Really. Really outside the top 2 twice, and outside the top 3 once. So, yeah. They were a consistent top half team. In Season 4 and Season 5. Season 5 in particular, they were a top 2 team consistently. Arguably the most consistent team in North America throughout that season. And then Season 6 comes around, they're a mediocre team, like middle of the pack consistently. And then this year, consistent 7th place finishes, though arguably for both, they kind of got hot near the end. And if you thought, like, if they got that run a bit earlier, maybe they knock off Renegades and enter into the playoffs as the 6th seed. And it's a massive shame that they weren't really able to either time. Because I think that team maybe could have made a splash.
but after a mediocre Season 6, the team has taken further steps back in Season 7. I'm always under the belief that making roster changes when they're necessary can be a good thing. However, eUnited have tested that belief, in my opinion, by making almost too many roster changes.
The weird thing with roster changes is you have to sort of find the balance between a roster change that works and a roster change that doesn't. Make too many changes and like split them out over the course of the year, and you just never really find cohesion with a roster, or are consistently going from honeymoon period to honeymoon period to the point where maybe if there's a long period of time where you're like, okay, this roster might work, and then suddenly the honeymoon period kind of fades and you realize, oh, I don't actually like playing with these guys, and that becomes a massive issue with the team's overall general performance. And I'll touch on it here, but the team I feel almost made too many changes, though I will say, of all the rosters they played and put out on the field, this is the roster I like the best.
I feel this is best exemplified by the fact that they've played with 4 different supports over the course of the year.
Yes, and I can literally name all 4 of them. Ionic, Genetics, Snoopy for half of Phase 2, and then Geno. They literally played with 4 different supports. It is ridiculous.
However, things are looking up for the red, white, and blue, as their most recent group of changes have given the team a very underrated support in Geno and some good leadership in Baskin.
2 players who I had some question marks around going into this tournament. But Geno, he played pretty well for me. There were some rookie mistakes he made, but there were some sick plays he made. I think a couple good Yamoja ults, I think, or was that, I might be misremembering Neil, but I think there were some good ults he had just in general throughout that series, as well as a pretty sick body block in one of the games on RDO, if I remember correctly. As for Baskin, I had a lot of doubts on Baskin, and I'll just quickly play the clip that I have right now of what I'm going to say about Baskin.
Though his play has been a bit sus.
That was me about Baskin, and I will say Baskin stepped it up at Worlds placements. He looked pretty well, especially on the Tsukiyomi. The Tsukiyomi solo for Baskin kinda slapped, not gonna lie. I'll touch on the other 3 in a bit, actually at the end of this segment.
If the team has used their time off wisely and has made the improvements that showed up as flashes near the end of Phase 2, this team could potentially try to pull off what last year's 7th seed did and win Worlds.
One thing I want to say. Whirlwind played out of his mind. Whirlwind on Giannis is arguably one of the best player god combinations in the league, and you can't tell me otherwise. Straight up. You can't tell me otherwise anymore. As for Scream and Snoopy, Scream just seemed kind of inconsistent to me, which, ironically enough, for Scream this season has been pretty consistent. It's just been kind of there some games and not really there others, and just a toss-up, really, of what sort of Scream you're getting. The real disappointment for me in the Worlds process for eUnited this year was Snoopy. Because he was basically irrelevant the entire time. He wasn't really performing at all. He just kept dying in fights over and over again to the point where he never made any sort of impact. Whereas Zapman was making a massive impact in all 3 of those games that they played against him. And that's really notable. Here we go.
Speaking of last year's SK Gaming, next up are the defending world champions themselves. I feel like for this group of players, finishing in a mediocre position in the regular season is par for the course.
I think I've grown jaded with this roster over the last couple of years. At the start of Season 6, when I learned that the Trifecta roster was going under SK and staying entirely together, which was Scary D, who at the time changed his name to Bel Air, Sam, Paul, Neil, and Zap. I predicted them to be a top 3 team. And they were very much not. Throughout the entirety of the season, they finished consistently in 7th place and actually had an under 500 record. But they really popped off at Worlds to the point where they won the whole damn thing. Season 7 comes around, I'm thinking, okay, surely they're still going to be good. Sure, you lost Sam, who was World's MVP, but you picked up Cuvo Fred. Cuvo Fred's a consistent rock who's always finished in the top half of the standings. And the team finished like 4th, 5th. They're competitive, but like they're not near the top. they're just a middle-of-the-road team again. Though this time with above a 500 record, though. Finishing 5th does mean that it's actually Kivo's first ever bottom half finish in the history of the Pro League. And he's played in every single Pro League split, so that's notable. Anyways, I'll touch on what I felt PK's shortcomings were, and then I'll talk about, at the end, the elephant in the room.
While this may not be the exact same team that won Worlds last year as SK, they only made one change of Sam leaving and Cubo Fred coming in. I would have thought that would have led to a better performance in the regular season, which it did as they finished 4th in Phase 1 and 5th in Phase 2. However, back-to-back quarterfinals exits in the Phase playoffs simply isn't ideal in the long run.
I will say here, yes, they lost in back-to-back Phase playoffs. Both times they ran into a Radiance team who was pretty friggin' good. Not that that's much of an excuse, especially based off of, well, we know what happened when the Knights played Radiance again. Spoiler alert, the Knights won. But, yeah. It was sort of a fair criticism going in, because regular season, there were flashes of time where they looked great. There were flashes of time where they didn't look that great. And in playoffs, they consistently looked not that great.
However, at the end of Phase 2, until they flamed out in playoffs, PK showed form that reminded me of their Worlds run from last year.
And that was a pretty common trend amongst people who were paying attention to the esports scene. A lot of people were like, oh, this is like last year's SK again. They're getting red hot at the perfect time. And that's like perfect bait for like, oh, they're gonna struggle hard.
If this team gets hot, the rest of the league needs to be on notice, as they could just mess around and go back-to-back, a feat no one has done since Energy Esports did it back in Season 3.
Can I call that I predicted this? I mean, based off of my predictions at the end of this video, you can very clearly say no. You didn't actually predict this. But I at least said, if this team gets hot, they can make a run. And they could potentially win it again. And what did they do? They made a run, and they won it again. There's another video I eventually want to make, really taking a deep dive at this run. Analyzing why I think this run is just a perfect synopsis of Smite Esports history as a whole, with a lot of different threads connecting back to previous World Championship wins. But I'll save that for another time. Quite simply, Scary D, Paul, Neilma, and Zap have done something that no player has done since the Boys of Energy did it in Season 3. Only 9 players can say that they have been 2-time world champions. And with the 4 names I mentioned can officially call themselves part of that group. And shoutouts to Cubo Fred for being the first European to win a world title since those very same Energy boys. Also shoutouts to Cubo Fred for completely mauling a chair. Arguably one of my favorite moments from the entirety of Worlds. And all I gotta say is, yeah. Congrats to PK. You may not have been the team that a lot of people would have expected to be lifting Thor's hammer and winning Worlds at the end of it all, but hey, you did it. And that's something that can never be taken away from you. You're a good org, PK. See you in the great beyond.
Next up are the pride and joy of Latin America and the team which every former international region is going to hitch their wagon to, Sanguine Esports.
Because let's be real. All of the former Global Series players, if Sanguine had made a deep run at Worlds, or even won Worlds, would have said, we friggin' told you international regions deserve an opportunity. That's honestly what would have happened. That, and you just hear a bunch of Spanish-speaking people in Twitch chat just saying "vamos" the whole time. Not that I'm like saying anything bad about Hispanic people. I'm Hispanic, for God's sakes. But also, shoutouts to me being unable to find like a traditional player picture for Yarkor and having to find a picture from his Twitter. Nice. But I'll give my opinions on Sanguine at the end. Quite simply, I think they disappointed.
To be honest with you, I was very torn on Sanguine at the start of the year, mostly because I did not know how they would perform.
I'd like to say a lot of people thought Sanguine were an enigma going into Season 7. The real question was, okay, these guys, they can play against minor league talent. They've showed over the course of like a week that they can play consistently in a tournament format against some pro league caliber talent and win. The question was, can they do it over an entire year? And I think the answer was no. Phase 1 looked phenomenal. Phase 1 showed that they can hang. Problem is with Phase 2, with all the adaptation that was made, they kind of started to fall apart.
However, as soon as they started playing games, I realized that they were a team to be taken seriously, and they've proven that all year with top 3 finishes in both splits, including winning Phase 1. Additionally, most of these players, sans Yorkor thanks to visa issues, have been here before, and 2 of them have beaten NA teams at Worlds before.
I want to touch on that a bit. Panatom, Shinto, Rongyu, and Netroid all were on Sanguine last year when they made Worlds placements. Yarko had visa issues, could not attend, was replaced by Haddix. That was the team that made Worlds quarterfinals last year and lost, and basically got demolished by rival in quarters. As for the mentioning earlier of beating an NA team at Worlds, that goes back to Season 3, specifically to Liched, who were the Latin American representatives that year. Shinto and Rongyu were both on Liched. Shinto was not the mid laner of that team, actually. He was the team's solo laner. Did play Thana solo, which was kind of sick, not gonna lie. And Rongyu was formerly known as Savas Picauza. I believe that's how that name's pronounced. Please, if I'm wrong, let me know. But he played support for that team as well. Fun fact about that team, though, by the way. Their mid laner, Nazex, was actually a former solo laner for Isurus at Season 2 Worlds, and was actually a substitute because their original mid laner had visa issues and couldn't attend. So he was actually on the Isurus team that they beat to get to Worlds, and he subbed in as their mid laner, which is a bit weird, but also kind of cool. Yeah, I'll keep going. Also, their coach, Oxaladian, was actually played for the LATAM team at Season 1 Worlds. More experience.
Season 3.
Yeah, Legions.
However, their performance in the playoffs in general has been less than ideal. The Phase 2 playoffs in particular left a lot to be desired.
Yeah, their Phase playoff performance was kind of disappointing. Phase 1, they lost to Radiance 3-1, I believe, and it was... Radiance looked pretty in control of that series. Phase 2, the loss to Renegades. Yes, it was brutal in the sense of one of those games they should have had won. They should have had that game where Renegades pulled off that miracle Titan defense. And to be fair, Renegades got extremely lucky during that Titan defense. But for Sanguine, I guess in a way, if I could best describe their Worlds run, it's almost as if they didn't learn. I'll touch on that more at the end.
Allowing them to be leapfrogged in the standings by Renegades. But just because Sanguine are coming off a weak performance, they shouldn't be counted out as a potential dark horse of doing something no team outside of North America or Europe has ever done. Winning Worlds.
And to be fair, they disappointed. I mentioned it earlier with the Titan defense in the Phase 2 playoffs. I remember, I think, there was a similar moment again during the series with Renegades again. And they once again failed to close it. And Renegades once again went on to win the game eventually after it. And if there's one play to me that described just how good Renegades looked against Sanguine in that 3-0, it was with Barracuda, Apollo ulting in the air, just hovering around the Fire Giant pit, and burning both Shinto's beads and Aegis without even landing. That to me just sort of is the showcase of they just outplayed them and outbrained them. Seriously, why didn't they ban the Apollo? It was a problem the entire series, and they never even banned it. That Cupid must have been insane. Hindsight in the tournament would prove that, yeah, Cupid was a good pick. Renegades, I used Cog Prime because Bara. Good meme. As I said earlier, could have used Venenu winning Worlds with eUnited in Season 4, but then I'd be using eUnited 3 times. Don't really want to do that.
Renegades are a tale of two teams. Sometimes they look like one of the hottest teams in the league, pulling off upsets, insane comebacks, or just straight up looking dominant against some of the best teams in the SPL. Other times, they're straight up outclassed by their opposition and are never able to come back into games. I feel this is most personified by Lasbra.
Let me go back actually to the whole tale of two teams thing, because there has never been something more true that I've ever said in my life. And they literally showed both forms during this tournament. For the placement round and the quarterfinals round against Sanguine, this team looked great. They were dominant. They were insane. They made great plays. Jake was playing out of his mind. Lasbra was playing well. Barracuda was pulling some real shit vintage Luminosity Season 3 performances. Variety was kind of feeding a bit, but still made impact on the game. Somebody get impact on the game. And then they go up against Ghost. And I sort of knew going into that series, Renegades was probably not going to win. And then they just got outclassed. It's just sort of they eventually just hit a brick wall. And that's exactly what happened. They ran into a brick wall. Its name was Ghost Gaming. And quite simply, they had no answers. Any sort of best personification of that, Game 3, the Cucullin dive under the Tier 1 tower. Dive under the Cucullin under the Tier 1 tower, we're fine. Okay, literally just turns around a triple. It's dumb. It's stupid. It probably shouldn't have happened, but it did.
If Lasbra's on point, Renegades will at the very least go down fighting, but will more than likely pull off the result they need. If not,
one thing I did say I liked, Renegades drafts were actually really cool to see. The Ratatusker being a flex pick was really cool to see. Barracuda pulling out the Apollo a lot and pulling out like the Artemis and like other weird stuff. Jake with the tier support just do whatever he wants. The Opwash mid I respected. Though, according to Barra himself, they expected an Aphrodite to be a mid Aphrodite, which is why they picked the Opwash. So, and it did not end up being an Aphrodite mid. Overall, I just think Renegades had a really good game plan for Worlds. And sometimes the team with a better game plan just wins. And that's what Renegades did in the first 2 rounds, but come semis, Ghost just outclassed them.
Another player personifies the, dare I say, RNG nature of Renegades is Jake.
Funny joke,
the rookie support can both look phenomenal and also make some rather disastrous decisions. However, they're coming off a great performance in the Phase 2 playoffs, seeing them leapfrog both PK and Sanguine to reach the top 4, giving them a matchup against an SCC team in the placement stage. A lot of these players have been here before, plus the organization as a whole has some unfinished business from last year.
Getting reverse swept, anyone?
Can Renegades pull off their biggest heist yet of snatching the title?
Short answer, no. Long answer, no. I hate myself for doing that. By the way, now I want to touch on this one and the next one transition together, because it's Spacestation Gaming and Radiance. For both these teams, I tried to focus on Raffer and adapting. With this being their last ever World Championships, obviously, Raffer was on SSG, adapting on Radiance. And I focused kind of around, so I wanted to use an Epsilon clip for one and an energy clip for the other. So for Raffer, I did the Epsilon clip because I did this in like backward seed order, so like the Epsilon one would have come first, first World Championship, and then have the second one after it. Nice thing. But I also wanted to include the Raffer Hammer Thrust. And it's safe to say, I found a way to include it. You know I had to do it. The moment is iconic, it's hilarious, and it's literally been added into the game since. Seriously. There's a Ward skin, and the one of the world's like SWC King Thor skins. The SWC King Thor skin, special emote, is literally the Hammer Thrust. And it is absolutely legendary. Another thing, speaking about Raffer though, is obviously he retired to go spend time with be with his girlfriend and all that, and then literally not even 2 weeks into this whole retirement deal, uh, house flood, brutal because of storms and stuff. There was a whole charity thing last night from when I'm recording this, which was the whole charity tournament hosted by Rathan. And I will put in the link to this video the GoFundMe for that. Not that I think anyone will click it from this video, but hey, in case anyone wants to donate anything, you can. Because it just sucks.
Few teams have been as consistent in the regular season as Spacestation Gaming have this year. Last year, 4/5 of his roster as Renegades ended their season getting reverse swept by the eventual world champions.
And they ended this season getting reverse swept by the defending world champions. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Though, to be fair, Vote wasn't on the roster last year when they got swept by the defending world champions. Oh, he already has a bad enough legacy of failure, I guess. I guess a legacy of failure in a way in Worlds as is. Still, his existence is pain.
And in the regular season, at least, the team has shown they're here to play with back-to-back second-place finishes.
Good regular season finishes throughout the course of the season. Does that sound familiar? It's exactly what Renegades did in Season 6.
This has been spearheaded by Nika having easily the best year of his career and possibly one of the best years for a solo laner ever.
Shoutouts to Nika. He had a phenomenal year. Seriously, his year was great. And I remember when he was just breaking into the Pro League and he was not that good.
However, like some other teams in the league, their weakness has come in the playoffs. Between the Phase 1 and Phase 2 playoffs, SSG has not won a single series, and has only won 1 out of their 7 games they've played, which is a bit uncharacteristic for a team with this much experience, especially one so good in tournaments last year as Renegades.
And that is a bit of a weird thing to me, because last year's Renegades was a really good team when it came to tournaments. They were literally undefeated at MSI in Season 6. Season 7, they have a really good run. They beat eUnited in the quarterfinals. However mad you want to say Season 6 eUnited was, and they nearly beat the eventual world champions in SK Gaming, and eventually get reverse swept, as I mentioned a couple times at this point. Season 7, they looked pretty consistently good throughout the Pro League, but in the phase playoffs, they just never looked all that good. Yeah, sure, they ran into Ghost Gaming and Radiance in those 2 runs. So, yeah, those are teams that are gonna be hard to beat, but only pulling out 1 game? That's a bit rough. Especially when that 1 game... No, that 1 game was in Phase 2. Okay, I will say that, to be fair. The 1 game was in the Phase 2 playoffs. It wasn't the Phase 1 playoffs.
For SSG, many of these players are hungry to finally claim their first title, but Raffer's looking to make history in what could...
Yeah, and I want to touch on that, because Nika, he's hungry for one. Cherio famously once said that he would not retire until he won a world championship, though he has eventually since retired without winning a world championship, which is a massive shame. Dardes has literally played 3 different roles in the Pro League. It's ridiculous. And Vote literally made the finals 2 straight years, losing both times, and he probably just wants to get that off his back.
To be his final year. He's already won 2 championships.
And it was Raffer's final year. Saying.
Can he win a 3rd and cement his legacy?
The answer is no. And I was gutted to see this team lose. One, just to see him lose, because you know it's the end of Cherio's career. You know it's the end of Raffer's career, and you just look at their reactions, and your heart breaks for them. Because on one hand, you're happy for PK, they did it again. But on the other hand, you're just thinking, oh god, they did it again. Thinking of how it feels on the other end of that, and it's just brutal to see. Props to SSG though. despite losing in the quarterfinals, they put up one hell of a fight. They looked really good those first 2 games. Maybe not so great the other 3, but they put up a hell of a fight even to the bitter end. Game 5 was a 58-minute game and a massive back and forth. So they didn't take the loss quietly. That's what I'll say. And it'd be interesting to see what happens to these 5 players going forward. I already know the destination for 2 of them. And I wish them nothing but the best going forward. Interesting to see what happens to the other 3. I also find it really funny that I used this clip for Radiance. Because adapting the 2s there, we're like, oh hey, it's our 2nd World Championship. 2 in a row. I could maybe misconstrue it as being the 2 seed. Also, shoutouts to this clip right here. I ended it directly when Raffer completely faceplants into one of his teammates, and it's hilarious. Seriously, faceplant.
If there's one thing,
it's great. Seriously, I went frame by frame, and when I paused on that frame, I was laughing for a good little bit. It was funny. Also, I wish that they'd release like team photos for like all the people in season 7. So I know like on the Smite Esports Wiki Discord or something, because I sometimes edit stuff. Like this, one of the people from Reddit's like, hey, I have like player photos and stuff. And I'm like, I really would have liked to have had that when I was doing this, like back in January or whatever. But oh well. Still, yeah, seriously, just go on the Smite Pro YouTube channel and just look at the preseason thing with Radiance and like the team picture. There's some glorious hairdos in that. BMT and Aurora in particular. Blessed be. Oh baby. That was something. Yeah. Let's just hear myself talk about Radiance.
thing that Radiance has proven across this entire season is that this team will come to play when it matters the most. Sure, this team has been inconsistent throughout the year during the regular season, but has been the perfect example of a team who has came alive in playoffs, making it to the finals of both the Phase 1 and Phase 2 playoffs.
And that was the biggest strength for Radiance going in. Everyone's like, okay, sure, this team might not be good in the regular season, but you know when playoffs come, this team's going to bring it. And, well, even at this tournament, they brought it.
The problem for Radiance is their record in those finals. 0-2.
And that once again reflected. They can bring it, but they weren't successful in the end. Big shame for me because I like this team.
The Phase 1 finals was a back-and-forth 5-game affair which they ended up losing, but the Phase 2 finals, they got swept. However, there is one solace. Radiance is stacked with people who knows what it takes to win this tournament. Benji, Cyclone Spin, and Aurora have all won Worlds before.
Cyclone, you can make the argument 2 times if you want to count that one console win, which is a bit of a stretch. Benji has made finals twice. He was on Enemy in Season 2 as Salt Machine, but got swept by, ironically enough, Adapting and Epsilon. BMT, never been to Worlds. Never even finished top half of the Pro League. But, we out here at Worlds, and then Adapting, we all know. 2-time world champion. Arguably the greatest Smite player in history.
And while BMT's never won, he certainly is hungry to do so. But the main story belongs to Adapting. Like his former teammate Raffer, he's also won 2 titles. And like Raffer, this Worlds is likely going to be his last.
It was his last.
Can the Adapt King assert his dominance at the top of the SPL one last time?
The answer was no. And it's a big shame because I wanted to see this team win. I think the storylines would have been really cool if they did. And also, I'm just a fan of the team, so I want to see the team win, obviously. And it looked so good. Game 1 against PK was so good for them. They really dominated the Knights. PK wins Game 2, alright. Radiance wins Game 3. And they had Game 4 in the bag. And then Free Phoenix is down. PK makes the insane play they did. And suddenly, bang. They win that game, managing that defense, the minions coming in perfectly to win Game 4. Kivo obviously destroys the chair, and the rest is history. One thing I will say about the Game 5 draft. I don't necessarily hate the idea of picking Anubis. It didn't work, but I don't hate the idea. I'm never a person who's like, there's some picks where I'm like, okay, that was a bad pick. Izanami mid in LG versus Energy Game 5. Phenomenal example of a bad pick. But when you hear the explanation of the concept as to why, you can sort of look at it and be like, okay, so this is what they were trying to do, but it didn't necessarily work. Like the Izanami mid pick, for example. People have said over the years, they were meant to like pressure out mid and like fan out that pressure towards the sides. And that never happened. And Energy just really outplayed him in certain areas and got like some really crazy stuff at the beginning of the game that really helped them snowball. But anyways, back to the point at hand. Radiance. Yeah. I thought they were going to win Worlds. That was just honestly my heart speaking, because I even said later in the video in the prediction section that my brain said Ghost, my heart said Radiance. But I thought this team could do it. And at the end of the day, they didn't. And that's a damn shame. But we'll see, at least for the people not named adapting, what they're going to be doing next year. You know I had to do it to him. As soon as I thought of this idea for Ghost Gaming, I immediately thought, alright, for Ghost I'm doing Mike. The easiest choice of my life. Seriously, go back and watch the first game, the player intros. There are some absolute gems in that whole thing. I highly recommend it. Even if you weren't watching at the time, Hindu just said some funny shit.
Simply put, Ghost Gaming are the favorites going into this event. They won.
Arguably the biggest favorites going into a World Championship since Season 3 Energy, in my opinion. That was the general consensus, that was the expectation, but not what actually happened. And I think as the average fan, you could probably say that's fun to see. That the team that everyone expected to win didn't necessarily win it. At the very least, was challenged.
Phase 1 and Phase 2 playoffs and have simply looked nigh unstoppable for most of the year. However, if there's one thing that we've learned over the years in Smite Esports, is that at Worlds, the expected doesn't always happen. The last consistent so-called best team in the league to win Worlds was Energy back in Season 3. Every time since, the event's been won by a team who got hot at just the right time, but who wasn't necessarily the best team all year.
You can make that claim about Season 4 United, Season 5 Splice, Season 6 SK. You can probably even stretch that argument back to Season 2 Epsilon if you want to say, like, oh, hey, they weren't even in the Pro League at the start of the year. And you can also make that argument for Season 1 COG Prime, because everyone thought, oh, COG Red's the better team.
Ghost are looking to buck the trend, and by all means, they have the squad to do it. This basically is the same rival squad that made the finals last year after all, and the only change they made was adding in Sam, who won last year with SK. Fine OK is still one of the best solo laners in the league, PandaCat and PBM are making the argument for the best duo lane of all time, and Sam's been an absolute monster this year in the SPL.
I want to touch on Ghost's roster, because I agree with everything I said there. PandaCat and PBM played like the best team, played like the best duo lane in the tournament. Jeff, why did I say Jeff? Barra and Jake. Sorry, I probably said Jeff. Like, instinctive Barra-Jeff thing. No. Barra and Jake looked phenomenal. During Renegades' first 2 series in the tournament. As soon as they ran into PandaCat and Mike, they were outclassed. And that's part of the reason why I felt that Renegades lost. Is because a lot of their early pressure and a lot of their early leads were played around the duo lane. When Renegade's duo lane got shut down, the team as a whole just kind of shut down. And that's what happened. Consistently, even throughout the finals with Zap and Neil, PandaCat and PBM played like the better duo lane. Game 1 and Game 2 were dominated by them. But Ghost never ended up getting the wins in the score column to reflect it.
Sam had some up and down performances during Worlds and during the finals, but overall some good stuff. FineOK played out of his mind. You could say the semifinals, and especially Game 4 of the finals. If FineOK isn't playing Cthulhu, PK might win that series in 4. As for Twig, I liked Twig during this tournament, and I'll touch more on Twig a bit later in this sort of explanation, because it's right after I actually unpause this. But to me, the big story of this team is Captain Twig, moving back to the mid lane after being a jungler for 5 years. He's looked really good all year, and it's all led up to this moment, where Twig can finally break his curse of making every world championship, but never winning one. For context behind that stat, Season 1 he made Worlds of SK, lost in the semifinals to Titan, and in the third place match to Cog Red. Titan went on to lose in the finals to Cog Prime. Season 2, he's on Fnatic at this point, loses to Epsilon in the quarterfinals. Epsilon goes on to win Worlds. Season 3, he's on Obey. Next 3 years, he's on Obey Alliance. Season 3, loses in the finals to Energy. Energy obviously wins Worlds. Season 4, loses in the semifinals to eUnited. They go on to win Worlds. Season 5, loses in the quarterfinals to Splice, who goes on to win Worlds. Season 6, he's on Rival. Rival loses to SK in the finals. SK wins Worlds. Season 7, he's on Ghost. They make the finals. They lose to the Pittsburgh Knights. The curse has sadly continued for Twig, and, as I'll lead into, the curse continues for Rival in a way as well. This is by far the best chance he's ever had. To top it all off, Ghost has inherited the past of Rival, a team who made the World's Finals 3 consecutive times and lost every single time. I personally love that edit, by the way, of flashing up each of the 3 like 3 different Worlds photos of the teams that won Worlds in seasons 4, 5, and 6. Also, massive shoutouts to each of those. Season 4, season 5 just general stuff, but season 6 this picture to me is really funny. Because you've got Neil just rubbing his eye for no reason, Zap having his eyes closed, Sam just yeah, I got it. Paul literally looking like he discovered fire. And Scary and Belair just kind of chill yeah, I did it. It's a great picture. 100%. I love this picture. Can Ghost overcome the ghosts of their past
Funny joke.
And win a title? So with my basement tier analysis done, let's get into my predictions. I'm going to very briefly touch on my predictions. I'm not going to go through the whole, me explaining everything. Because I already went over most of the stuff that I felt at the time, and all that as well. Top half of the bracket, honestly, I pretty much nailed almost all of it. Though I thought the Renegades Sanguine series would be closer. Other than that, I feel it went about how I expected it to. With Ghost beating Renegades as well, that was a thing I really expected to happen. And I even correctly predicted Ghost losing finals in a way, but I would not have predicted them losing to the Knights. So once again, the bottom half of the bracket's where I sort of fell off. I thought Mind the Gap would be a bit more competitive against SSG. They weren't. I thought eUnited would be more competitive against the Knights. They weren't. I thought the Knights would actually lose to SSG. Looked like that was very possible, but reverse sweep happened. Yeah. And then the semifinals, Radiance looks like they have it. They don't. Knights win that series, move on to the finals. Beat Ghost in what is a classic final series. It's basically the Season 1 Cog Prime Titan finals, but better. Because the games are more competitive, and ultimately, it's just a crazier storyline based off of the fact that the team that basically pulled off the Cog Prime was a team that was far less expected to be there than Cog Prime even was. So, that's it. But I just want to end this whole thing with one last sort of shout out to Hi-Rez and the whole production staff and everyone involved in making this World Championships what it was. It was a phenomenal event to watch. Obviously, this should have been, when this was first planned, it was going to be a LAN event. It was going to be at the Cobb for the first time since Season 4, and everyone was excited for it. But with the whole COVID-19 situation, everyone was dealt a bad hand. This Worlds was going to be online. No one really knew how it was going to go. And Hi-Rez hit it out of the park.
Sure, there were some maybe not so great things, but at the end of the day, the matches themselves were hype. Sure, everything was either a 3-0 or a 3-2, but there was a lot of great casting throughout the whole event. I want to give massive props to Dolson and Mifflin for their improvement over the course of the year, and for Finch and Aggro and really everyone in the casting team stepping up and making this World Championship feel as hype as it should have. Because it's really hard to think, like, when you're just sitting with you and one other person in a studio with no one there, thinking about how you need to manage that hype and how you need to really bring the energy when it could just be like a snooze fest, maybe more subdued standard Pro League cast, but they hit it out of the park. They did it perfectly to the point where I can say, not only with the casting, but with the gameplay itself, that we saw the best Smite World Championships, I think, ever. And that's something that I think is going to stick with me for a long time. This was one fantastic tournament. And I can't wait to do all this sort of thing again. Whether it be if I ever want to make a preview video for Pro League rosters when they get announced in mid-February for Season 8, or just the Season 8 Worlds preview. Because if Season 8 Worlds is anything like Season 7, we're in for one hell of a ride. And I've been rambling for far too long. I already did a first attempt at this video that the audio sounded like crap and it took 40 minutes. This one's over an hour, so I'm sorry, but hey, you're getting the content you want. So that's really going to do it for me. Thank you so much for putting through with me in all this. If you've watched all the way to here, you're insane. You literally probably have nothing better to do, and shoutouts to that. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you, whoever's watching this, whenever I see you. I'll see you then.